Ed Miliband. It's a case of do what I say, not what I do. That seems to be pretty standard for all these net zero zealots. He's gone pretty quiet over what is looking more like the renationalisation of British Steel. Perhaps even he can see that net zero nonsense is utter madness, leaving the UK vulnerable and exposed in an ever unstable world, where to reach a ridiculous target with outsourced carbon-emitting practices like mining for coal and producing steel to places like China. But turns out that Energy and Net Zero Secretary Ed Miliband isn't so eco-friendly himself.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
But the only thing blowing in the wind is Ed Miliband as he travels by aircraft, the most polluting mode of transport, to various events, shall we call them. According to the Taxpayers Alliance, Ed has racked up a bill of £62,712 since Labour came into power in July. Some of you might think that that's not actually that much, but let's put that into context. Claire Coutinho, his Tory predecessor, spent just £6,155 in her first 6 months. Over £25,000 of Ed's expenditure, only a month after Labour took office, was spent on a trip to Brazil to position the UK as a strategic partner and global leader on international climate. The irony, ahead of the G20 summit and COP30, the latter to take place in the Amazon rainforest, where Brazilians have bulldozed through the forest, the lungs of the earth, to create a 4-lane motorway, so delegates who have mostly flown there via private jet can get to the conference to discuss how they can save the planet. Out of principle, we should really be boycotting it, but not Ed. Another 20 grand was spent attending Climate Week in New York, over 7 grand spent attending the G20 Energy Ministerial, and almost 11,000 spent attending COP29. And of course, this is under the backdrop of Ed warning the public to reduce our domestic flights, in his words, as much as we possibly can. Reform UK Deputy Leader Richard Tice called him a flying green hypocrite, and Joanne Marshall from the Taxpayers Alliance said, hard-working Brits shouldn't have to fund this climate hypocrisy from MPs who refuse to practice what they preach. And funnily enough, Ed has gone awfully quiet over British Steel, probably best. A spokesperson for the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero has said, it is in Britain's national self-interest to represent the country at key international summits, attracting investment for jobs and growth. You see, that's the problem with this, in my view, net zero zealotry. They appear to think it's OK for them to emit whatever carbon they like so that they can go about their business effectively, preaching their net zero virtues whilst expecting us to change our behaviour accordingly to achieve our goals under the constraints of their net zero lunacy, which by their own admission makes them impossible to reach. Well, joining me, energy policy analyst Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm, welcome to the programme. Really good to talk to you. Malcolm,
afternoon.
Are these net zero, I almost called them Ed Zero, I managed to stop myself. Is this net zero somewhat of sheer hypocrisy? Because literally it doesn't seem like it can be achieved, and a lot of people seem to be ignoring what the goal is under the guise of doing positive things to net zero. Should this really be allowed? Shouldn't Ed Miliband be practising what he preaches?
I mean, I'd say, firstly, I think it's rather a good thing if our energy minister does go abroad and sees some of the areas where these policies are being implemented. I think you should go to Tasmania, where an enormous swathe of the rainforest has been knocked down in order to make way for the wires to carry offshore wind onto the Australian mainland. I think you should go to Germany and see how the German energy vendor is causing enormous problems for German industry. I would like an energy minister who is educated in the practical effects of some of the policies that he's actually following. And clearly, the world being as it is, air travel is really the only possible way to get there. On the wider picture, I'd say climate change, I believe, is real, and we have to address it. There are real questions about how effective current government policy is. But I think it would be very unfortunate if the whole debate simply disappeared.
Well, could he not address, you said it's good for him to travel the world and see what these policies do, but as you said, one place where they're chopping down a rainforest to put the cabling in for wind, which is ridiculous because obviously trees help to absorb CO2, so you really want to keep them going. You don't want to be cutting them down. But he's also going to places like Brazil to have a look at what's going on for COP30. Well, they've just drilled through the Amazon rainforest to create a motorway so that people can get to the conference, whilst all the delegates will be flying via private jet. I would rather that he stayed home and looked at the effect of his policies on the British people. So the effects of net zero subsidies, which mean that the British people are paying higher electricity costs, and the reality of literally carpeting the land with solar panels, because he can now see that if for example, in the case of in Wales, where there was a bad storm, that weather destroyed half the panels. So I would rather we did that,
well,
wouldn't you?
One of the reasons that Brazil is clearing rainforest is to make way to plant crops for biofuels in the developing world, including the UK. Now, I want ministers to see that, and I want ministers to understand at first hand that biofuels in particular, I think, are probably rather worse for the planet than the coal and gas and oil that we used to use. And yet they are at present regarded as being a good thing. And a lot of these things, yes, of course, you can learn a lot of this online. I've no doubt
exactly.
The minister has a lot of online meetings as well. But I do want him to be out there and actually seeing things firsthand, because I think some of the policies that are being followed will be counterproductive towards the genuine fight against climate change.
But he's
and
not.
I think the more the minister can see that on the ground, the better.
But he's not, though, is he? He's not seeing it. He's not listening. You know, even if he travels to those places, even listening to his carbon capture, £22 billion in carbon capture. He needs to travel over to Milwaukee, where they tried it. It cost $14 billion, and then they abandoned it because it didn't work, and it cost an absolute utter fortune. But he's not, is he? He's coming up with policies, even though he could. And also the expenses. One of the trips, the first one costing him £25,000, another one costing him 20 grand, another costing 11, another costing 7. How on earth? Why is it costing so much?
I don't know, and I would stress I've got no brief to defend the minister personally, but it does seem to me that these sums of money, if he learns one thing that prevents the UK going down a single dead end in this area, the savings to the economy could be literally millions, if not billions. And it's always an issue with going overseas. I don't believe that ministers go overseas as junkets. I think they rightly go over to learn what's going on in other countries. Now, whether he's listening to the lessons is, of course, a political question rather than that. But if he's not actually getting the lessons firsthand, then it makes it less likely. And I would also say it's important for his officials to see this as well. It's important for the civil servants to be seeing these things because, of course, in many cases, they are advising the minister, and it's very important that they see these things firsthand as well, in my personal opinion.
Well, I'm not really seeing that because I think that, for example, we're on COP30 now. COP30. That should tell us something about this climate conference that hasn't really produced much at all. If anything, the only thing it's produced is CO2. That's pretty much it, because the rest of it is full of hot air. Nothing else has really happened as a result of all of these. If anything, he should be boycotting it, because some of the most important players aren't even there, like China, India, the United States. They don't really want to be part of it. And he should also be understanding what carpeting this country will do to food production, which seems utter madness. And they need to be talking in unison. All these pylons that they're planning to erect and change all the planning laws so that they can bulldoze through, so they can transport the electricity. But we all know that pylons, transporting that electricity, you lose about, a third of it anyway? There's got to be more efficient measures of doing things. But anyway, it's really good to talk to you.
Sorry, go on the supergrid. But it is the case, if we want to move electricity, and this is the case if we use coal stations or nuclear stations, which I think make a great deal of sense, or anything else, you've still got to transport that electricity from where it's generated to where people are going to use it, and you will still get a degree of loss in the process. The alternative of trying to put a great big power station in the middle of every city, I think, is probably worse, and on all sorts of ways. But running electricity in energy is not easy, and that's why it is very important that our ministers understand at least the basics of the difficult. I mean, one of the things which is an issue with renewables is just how difficult it is to maintain supply and demand exactly in balance on an electricity grid. Now, if you're using nuclear, coal, gas, you can rank them up and down to follow the load, and traditional electricity systems have done that extremely well. France is a very good example. But Germany is showing us the way, in a negative way, of how when you become too dependent on unreliable sources, then it starts to be a challenge for your industries. And you start to get threat to the grid stability. And these are things that I think it's very helpful for all of our people in positions of power and decision making to have a grasp. And the best way to get a grasp is to talk firsthand, face to face, in my view, to the people who are already living this situation, and making sure that the UK doesn't end up in a dead end. While, as I say, not losing sight of the fact that climate change, I believe, is a real concern for us, and we do need to look at a sensible way forward that's not going to ruin people's lives today, but is going to continue us down the road towards low carbon. And for me, nuclear is the one that answers both the questions.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you, but climate change, everyone knows the climate is changing. It will always change. Nothing stays the same, Malcolm. So, in my view, of course it's changing, but how much impact we have on it is the question. Malcolm Grimston, thank you very much. He's an energy policy analyst.